The Terror Trilogy, Journey into Darkness. Story 1. The Abandoned Lighthouse. The abandoned lighthouse on the Ghost Island had been there for centuries. It was once a beacon of hope for sailors lost at sea, but now it was a haunting reminder of the past. The island was deserted, except for a few ruins and the lighthouse that stood tall on the shore. A group of friends decided to explore the island, hoping to uncover its secrets. They had heard stories of the lighthouse being haunted by the ghost of the lighthouse keeper, who had been murdered by pirates years ago. Despite the warning, they were curious and decided to explore the lighthouse. As they climbed up the creaky stairs, they noticed that the light at the top was flickering. The room was dark, and the only light came from the lanterns they were carrying. Suddenly, they heard a sound, a faint whisper that seemed to come from nowhere. They froze, unsure of what to do next. Then, they heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing in the darkness. They knew they were not alone in the lighthouse. They followed the sound, their hearts pounding in their chests, until they reached the top. There, in the flickering light, they saw a ghostly figure. It was the ghost of the lighthouse keeper, his face twisted in rage. He warned them to leave the island before it was too late, but they were too afraid to move. Suddenly, they heard another sound, the sound of laughter. They turned around and saw a group of pirates, their faces twisted and evil, holding swords and guns. The pirates had come to claim the island and the treasure that lay hidden within. They had murdered the lighthouse keeper and left his ghost to haunt the island. The friends tried to run, but the pirates were too fast, and soon they were surrounded. The pirates demanded that the friends tell them where the treasure was hidden. When the friends refused, the pirates started to torture them, using knives and whips. They were tied up, and the pirates took turns torturing them. Days turned into weeks, and the friends were no longer sure of what was real and what was not. They were starved and dehydrated, barely able to stand. They could see the ghost of the lighthouse keeper watching them, a look of pity on his face. One day, the pirates decided to kill the friends. They tied them up and left them in the lighthouse, with the intention of burning it down. The friends watched in horror as the pirates set fire to the lighthouse, the flames licking at their feet. As the fire consumed the lighthouse, the friends were consumed by the flames. They screamed and cried, begging for mercy, but it was too late. The ghost of the lighthouse keeper watched in horror as the flames consumed the lighthouse and the friends within. Years passed, and the island remained deserted. The lighthouse had long since burned down, leaving only ruins behind. But at night, if you listen closely, you can still hear the ghostly laughter of the pirates and the screams of the friends as they burned in the lighthouse. The ghost of the lighthouse keeper still watches over the island, warning all who come near to stay away. He is doomed to haunt the island forever, a reminder of the horrors that took place on the Ghost Island. The ghost of the lighthouse keeper had been unable to save the friends from the brutal fate that befell them. He felt an immense sadness and guilt that he couldn't do more to protect them. Over the years, he watched as other people landed on the island, drawn by its mystique and unaware of the horrors that lurked within. The ghost of the lighthouse keeper tried to warn them of the danger, but few would listen to the warnings of a ghost. Most people ignored him and continued exploring the island, only to meet the same fate as the friends who had come before them. As time went on, the island gained a reputation for being cursed, and few dared to venture there. But there were always those who sought adventure and were willing to take the risk. They believed that the stories of ghosts and curses were just legends, and they had nothing to fear. One such group was a team of researchers who arrived on the island to study its history and explore its ruins. They were well equipped and had come prepared for any eventuality, but they soon discovered that the island was not as safe as they had thought. As they made their way towards the ruins of the lighthouse, they felt a sense of unease, as if they were being watched. They ignored the feeling, thinking it was just their imagination. But as they entered the ruins of the lighthouse, they felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Suddenly, they heard a sound, a faint whisper that seemed to come from nowhere. Then, they heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing in the darkness. They turned around and saw the ghost of the lighthouse keeper, his face twisted in anger. The ghost warned them to leave the island before it was too late. But they refused to listen. They were determined to complete their research, no matter what the cost. The ghost tried to reason with them, telling them about the fate of the friends who had come before them, but they were too stubborn to listen. The researchers began to explore the ruins, oblivious to the danger that surrounded them. But as they searched, they heard strange noises, whispers, and footsteps. They started to feel as if they were being followed. As they turned around, they saw the ghostly figures of the pirates emerging from the shadows. The researchers tried to run, but the pirates were too fast. They were surrounded, with no hope of escape. The pirates demanded that the researchers tell them where the treasure was hidden, but they knew nothing of it. The pirates didn't believe them and started torturing them. The researchers were tied up and left to suffer the same fate as the friends who had come before them. Days turned into weeks, and the researchers were starved and dehydrated. They were tortured, and some of them died from their injuries. The survivors were traumatized and unable to function normally. They had been consumed by the horrors of the ghost island. The ghost of the lighthouse keeper watched in horror as the researchers suffered the same fate as the friends who had come before them. He knew that the island would continue to attract adventurers, drawn by its dark history and the promise of treasure. But he hoped that someday, someone would listen to his warnings and stay away from the cursed island. He knew that he was doomed to haunt the island forever. But he hoped that he could at least save someone from the horrors that lurked within. Years went by, and the island remained deserted. The only sounds were the howling of the wind and the crashing of the waves against the rocky shore. The ghost of the lighthouse keeper remained vigilant, watching for any signs of intruders. One day, a group of teenagers stumbled upon the island. They had heard the stories of the cursed island and had come to explore it, seeking thrills and adventure. They were oblivious to the danger that awaited them. The ghost of the lighthouse keeper tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. They laughed and made fun of the ghost, thinking it was just a prank. They continued exploring the ruins of the lighthouse, completely unaware of the horrors that lay in wait. As they entered the lighthouse, they heard strange noises and whispers. They felt as if they were being watched, and they were overcome with a sense of dread. Suddenly, they saw the ghost of the lighthouse keeper, his face twisted in anger. The ghost warned them to leave the island before it was too late, but they ignored him. They thought it was all part of the adventure and continued exploring. But as they searched the ruins, they were ambushed by the ghostly pirates. The pirates demanded that they tell them where the treasure was hidden, but the teenagers knew nothing of it. The pirates didn't believe them and started torturing them. The teenagers were tied up and left to suffer the same fate as the others who had come before them. Days turned into weeks, and the teenagers were starved and dehydrated. They were tortured, and some of them died from their injuries. The survivors were traumatized and unable to function normally. They had been consumed by the horrors of the ghost island. The ghost of the lighthouse keeper watched in horror as the teenagers suffered the same fate as the others who had come before them. He knew that the island would continue to attract adventurers, drawn by its dark history and the promise of treasure. But he hoped that someday, someone would listen to his warnings and stay away from the cursed island. He knew that he was doomed to haunt the island forever, but he hoped that he could at least save someone from the horrors that lurked within. As the years went by, the island became known as the Island of the Damned. It was shrouded in darkness, and the ghosts of the lighthouse keeper and the pirates continued to haunt it. Few dared to venture there, knowing the horrors that awaited them. But there were always those who sought adventure and were willing to take the risk. They believed that the stories of ghosts and curses were just legends, and they had nothing to fear. And so, the cycle continued, with new victims falling prey to the horrors of the abandoned lighthouse and the cursed island. Story 2. The Haunted Shipwreck. It was a dark and stormy night, and the waves were crashing against the rocky shore. The air was thick with fog, and the sound of the wind was deafening. The small fishing village was shrouded in darkness, and the only light came from the lighthouse on the hill. But out in the sea, there was another light. It was the light of a ship, a ghostly apparition that had been seen before. The ship was an old sailing vessel, its sails torn and tattered. It was said to be cursed, haunted by the spirits of the sailors who had perished on it. The ship had been wrecked many years ago, and it had been left to rot in the sea, but it had never quite disappeared. Instead, it had become a legend, a story told around campfires and whispered in hushed tones. As the villagers huddled together, they could hear the sound of the ship approaching. It was getting closer and closer, and soon they could see it through the thick fog. It was a terrifying sight, a ghostly apparition that seemed to be hovering over the water. The ship was old and decayed, its hull covered in barnacles and seaweed. It was a haunting sight, and the villagers could feel the fear rising within them. They knew that the ship was cursed, and that it brought with it the spirits of the dead. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the ship collided with the rocky shore. The sound was deafening, and the villagers could feel the ground shaking beneath them. They knew that the ship had crashed, but they could not see it through the thick fog. As the villagers waited, they heard strange noises coming from the ship. There was the sound of creaking wood, and the screams of the sailors who had perished on it. They knew that the ship was haunted, and that the spirits of the dead were trapped inside. As the night wore on, the villagers could hear strange noises coming from the ship. They heard the sound of footsteps, and the rustling of clothing. They knew that the spirits of the dead were walking among them, and they were afraid. The next day, the villagers decided to investigate the ship. They approached it cautiously, knowing that it was cursed. As they boarded the ship, they could feel the fear rising within them. They knew that they were in grave danger. As they explored the ship, they could hear the sound of whispers and murmurs. They saw shadows moving, and they knew that the spirits of the dead were watching them. They knew that they were not alone on the ship. Suddenly, one of the villagers screamed. He had seen a ghostly figure, a sailor who had perished on the ship. The figure had appeared out of nowhere, and it had vanished just as quickly. The villagers knew that they were in the presence of the dead, and that they needed to leave the ship immediately. As they tried to leave the ship, they heard strange noises coming from below deck. They heard the sound of chains rattling, and the screams of the sailors who had perished on the ship. They knew that they were trapped, and that they needed to find a way out. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the ship started to sink. The villagers knew that they needed to escape before it was too late. They ran to the deck, but they were met by the ghostly apparitions of the sailors who had perished on the ship. The spirits of the dead were angry, and they wanted revenge. They had been trapped on the ship for too long, and they were determined to take the villagers with them. The villagers knew that they were in grave danger, and that they needed to escape before it was too late. As the ship started to sink, the villagers scrambled to find a way out, but the spirits of the dead were blocking their path, and they were unable to escape. The ship was slowly sinking into the sea, and the villagers were running out of time. Just as all hope seemed lost, a bright light appeared in the distance. It was the light of a rescue boat, sent by the Coast Guard. The villagers cried out for help, and the boat rushed towards them. The crew of the rescue boat managed to pull the villagers to safety. Just as the ship sank into the sea, the spirits of the dead were left behind, trapped in the wreckage of the ship. The villagers never forgot their terrifying experience on the haunted shipwreck. They knew that they had been lucky to escape with their lives, and they vowed never to return to that cursed vessel again. But even to this day, the shipwreck remains a haunting reminder of the dangers that lurk in the sea. The spirits of the dead still haunt the wreckage, and the villagers know that they will always be watching, waiting for their next victims to come aboard. Years passed, and the villagers tried their best to forget about the haunted shipwreck, but it seemed like the spirits of the dead had not forgotten them. Strange occurrences began to happen in the village. People reported hearing strange noises in the night, and some even claimed to have seen ghostly apparitions lurking around the shipwreck. The villagers grew restless and fearful. They knew that they had to do something to put the spirits of the dead to rest, so they called upon a team of paranormal investigators to come and investigate the haunted shipwreck. The team arrived in the village with all their equipment, ready to explore the cursed vessel. They boarded the rescue boat that had saved the villagers all those years ago, and made their way towards the wreckage of the ship. As they approached the shipwreck, they could feel the chill in the air. The sea was calm, but the atmosphere was heavy with a sense of foreboding. The team began their investigation, setting up cameras and recording devices to capture any paranormal activity. As they explored the shipwreck, they could hear strange noises coming from below deck. They heard the sound of footsteps and the rustling of clothing. They knew that the spirits of the dead were still trapped inside. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the team felt the ship lurch. It seemed as though something was trying to push them off the ship. They could feel the fear rising within them, and they knew that they were in danger. The team tried to leave the ship, but they were blocked by the spirits of the dead. They saw ghostly apparitions of sailors who had perished on the ship, and they heard their screams echoing through the night. The team knew that they were trapped, and that they had to find a way out. As they searched for an escape route, they stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the ship. Inside, they found a chest filled with old documents and a diary belonging to the captain of the ship. As they read through the diary, they discovered the horrifying truth about what had happened on the ship. The captain had been a cruel and ruthless man, and he had treated his crew with disdain. He had pushed them to the brink of exhaustion, and many had perished as a result. But what was even more chilling was that the captain had made a deal with a dark force. In exchange for wealth and power, he had sold the souls of his crew to the spirits of the dead. The ship had been cursed, and it had become a vessel for the damned. The team knew that they had to break the curse and put the spirits of the dead to rest. They performed a ritual to cleanse the ship, using holy water and prayers. Slowly but surely, the ship started to calm down, and the spirits of the dead began to fade away. The team emerged from the shipwreck, exhausted but relieved. They knew that they had done something important. and that they had put an end to the curse that had haunted the village for so many years. From that day on, the village was never the same. The people were no longer afraid of the haunted shipwreck, and the strange occurrences that had plagued them for so long came to an end. The spirits of the dead were finally at peace, and the villagers could finally rest easy. Story 3. The Sinister Forest. In the heart of the dense forest, there lay a place that no one dared to venture. The villagers knew it as the Sinister Forest, a place where darkness reigned supreme and where the trees whispered secrets that no one dared to hear. Rumors of the forest's malevolent nature had circulated for centuries, and tales of people vanishing without a trace had spread throughout the land. No one knew what lay within its depths, but the stories that were told were enough to keep even the bravest of souls at bay. One day, a group of adventurers decided to brave the forest's mysteries. They had heard of the riches that lay within its depths, and they were determined to uncover its secrets. As they made their way deeper into the forest, they felt the atmosphere change. The air grew colder, and the trees began to close in around them. They heard strange noises coming from the shadows, and the rustling of leaves seemed to be speaking in hushed tones. The group soon realized that they were not alone. Something was watching them, stalking them through the darkness. They tried to run, but the forest seemed to be alive, holding them back at every turn. As the night fell, they stumbled upon an abandoned cabin, surrounded by an eerie mist. They decided to take refuge inside, hoping to find some semblance of safety. But as they entered, they could feel something was wrong. The cabin was empty, save for a single rocking chair, which swayed back and forth in the darkness. The group knew that they had made a mistake by entering the cabin, but it was too late to turn back now. As they tried to leave, they found that the door was stuck. Panic set in, and they began to search for another way out. They could hear something moving in the shadows, and the rustling of leaves grew louder and more intense. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the forest. They knew that they were being hunted, and that they had to find a way out of the forest before it was too late. As they searched for a way out, they came across an ancient tree, its roots twisting and gnarled like the fingers of a corpse. It seemed to be calling out to them, and they felt drawn to its presence. As they approached the tree, they could feel its malevolent energy. It seemed to be alive, pulsating with an eerie aura. They knew that they had to confront the evil that lurked within the forest, and that they had to destroy it before it destroyed them. With all their courage, they attacked the tree with their weapons. The wood splintered and cracked, and a deafening roar shook the forest. The group was thrown back, and they could feel the ground tremble beneath their feet. As they regained their senses, they saw that the tree had been vanquished. Its twisted roots lay shattered, and the malevolent aura that had once surrounded it had dissipated. The group emerged from the forest, shaken but triumphant. They knew that they had faced a darkness that few had ever encountered, and that they had emerged victorious. The Sinister Forest would forever be known as a place of darkness and malevolence, but for those who had ventured within its depths, it would always be a reminder of the courage that they had shown in the face of evil. As the group emerged from the forest, they realized that they had been gone for much longer than they had anticipated. The sun had set, and the darkness had engulfed the land. The forest had taken its toll on them, and they were tired and shaken from the experience. They stumbled back to their village, where they were met with concern and worry. Their families and friends had been waiting for them, fearing the worst. When they told their story, no one could believe it. They had never heard of anyone confronting the malevolent force within the Sinister Forest and surviving. The group had faced a darkness that few could comprehend, and it had left an indelible mark on them. They knew that they could never return to the forest, for fear of the evil that still lurked within its depths. Years went by, and the group eventually went their separate ways. They had all carried the memory of the sinister forest with them, and they could never shake the feeling that the darkness was still out there, waiting to claim its next victim. One day, a traveler came to the village, seeking information about the sinister forest. He was a historian, and he had heard stories of the evil that lay within its depths. He was determined to uncover the truth about the forest and its dark secrets. The group was hesitant to speak of their experience, knowing that it would only bring back the memories that they had tried to forget. But the historian was persistent, and they eventually relented. As they told their story, the historian listened intently. He was fascinated by their account, and he knew that he had to see the forest for himself. The group warned him of the danger, but the historian was undeterred. He knew that the truth lay within the forest, and he was willing to face the darkness to uncover it. He set out alone, armed with only a lantern and his courage. As he made his way deeper into the forest, he felt the atmosphere change. The air grew colder, and the trees closed in around him. He heard strange noises coming from the shadows, and the rustling of leaves seemed to be speaking in hushed tones. He knew that he was not alone, and that the darkness was watching him. He stumbled upon the same abandoned cabin that the group had found years before. He felt drawn to it, as if it held the answers that he was searching for. As he entered, he could feel the malevolent energy that permeated the cabin. The rocking chair still swayed back and forth, and the historian could hear whispers coming from the shadows. He searched for a way out, but the door was stuck. Panic set in, and he began to search for another way out. He could hear something moving in the shadows, and the rustling of leaves grew louder and more intense. Suddenly, he heard a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the forest. He knew that he was being hunted, and that he had to find a way out of the forest before it was too late. He searched frantically, but the forest seemed to have closed in around him. He could feel the darkness closing in, and he knew that he was running out of time. Just as he was about to give up hope, he stumbled upon the ancient tree that the group had destroyed years before. He knew that he had to destroy it again, to rid the forest of its malevolent energy. He attacked the tree with his bare hands, feeling the wood splinter and crack beneath his fingertips. A deafening roar shook the forest, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. As the darkness dissipated, the historian emerged from the forest, shaken but triumphant. He had faced the darkness that had claimed so many lives, and he had emerged. But as he turned to leave, he noticed something strange. The trees, which had been silent and still before, were now moving. Their branches were writhing like tentacles, and their roots were pushing up from the ground. He realized with horror that the forest was alive, and it was attacking him. The historian ran as fast as he could, dodging the thrashing branches and swerving around the lashing roots. The forest seemed to be pursuing him, chasing him with an insatiable hunger. He stumbled and fell, and the trees closed in around him. He could feel their branches wrapping around him like serpents, pulling him down into the earth. He struggled to free himself, but the trees were too strong. He screamed in terror as he felt them crushing him, their bark scraping against his skin like sandpaper. Just as he thought that he was done for, he felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. It was like a jolt of electricity, filling him with a fierce strength. With a roar, he broke free of the tree's grasp. He surged to his feet and lashed out at the trees, his fists pounding into their bark with incredible force. The trees recoiled, shrieking in agony. The forest itself seemed to be in pain, and the ground shook with a deafening roar. With one final, powerful blow, the historian shattered the tree in front of him. It exploded into a shower of splinters and dust, and the forest fell silent. The historian emerged from the forest, battered and bruised but alive. He had faced the darkness and won, but he knew that he could never forget the horror that he had faced. As he left the forest behind, he could hear whispers in the wind. It was like a faint voice, calling out to him from the depths of the forest. He shuddered, knowing that the sinister forest was not done with him yet, but he knew that he had the strength to face it, to protect others from the evil that lay within. And so, he continued on his journey, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead, for he knew that the sinister forest was just one of many malevolent forces in the world, and that there were other dangers out there waiting for him, but he was ready to face them all, armed with nothing but his courage and his determination to protect others from the darkness that lurked in the shadows.